Okay, now that you have all your equipment ready for installation, in our setup here we're going to have the transceiver, the amplifier, and then we're going to have an antenna tuner that will connect to the antenna. The first step you want to do is you want to hook the RF output of your transceiver, which usually is labeled transmitter. You hook that coax onto there. Now this coax doesn't have to be very large, just enough to handle usually about 100 watts. So you can use RG58 type coax will be sufficient for that. So you come out of the output of the transceiver and you go to RF in on the back of your amplifier. Next connection, notice RF out connector of your amplifier. Now this particular amplifier, they have the RF in and RF out in this order, but always read the labeling on the back of your amp because connectors can vary in different locations of your equipment. So here we're going from RF out of our amplifier. Now this has got to handle the power of your amplifier. Usually you always want to use at least an RGA coax or larger when you're using more than a few hundred watts of RF. So you go with RF out to the back of the tuner where it says transmitter. The next step determines what type of antenna you have. If you're having a balanced line using a twin lead coming in, then you would hook to the balanced line post of the tuner. Or if you just have a long wire coming in, you would want to make sure you hook to the long wire post and also an RF ground hooked to the ground terminal of the tuner. Just so we're using a coaxial input from our antenna, and we're going to connect this to our coax 1 of our tuner. Now also, if you're having a watt meter you're going to put in line, you would want to put that in between this line here. Your watt meter would be inserted between the RF out and into the transmitter of your tuner. Also, if you're adding a low-pass filter in your coaxial line, be sure your low-pass filter can handle the power rating of your amplifier, and your low-pass filter would always hook right on the output of your amplifier. So if you have a low-pass filter, you would connect that in according to the output connector of your amplifier. The next step would be the amplifier needs to know when to transmit and when to receive. So that requires a line to be connected from your transceiver to the amplifier. Most transceivers, they require special type DIN cables that will interface the transceiver to the amplifier. Now Ameritron does make a ARB 704 radio to amplifier interface. This is what we're going to be using today in our installation. We're going to use the ARB 704. Now this is a multiple connections for different type transceivers to different type amplifiers. Some transceivers you don't use all of these ports. Okay, this ARB 704 here, to interface this to the radio in the amplifier, we're going to use a PNP ADI cable to interface into, just so happens we're using a ICOM 725 type amplifier. So you would connect one end of the cable into the accessory port of your ICOM. Just line the indention up and plug it in. And then the other end has a 5-pin which plugs into the 704. Now also your manual for the 704 will talk about jumpers inside the 704, but there should be no reason to have to reconfigure those jumpers. They're always set factory setting to work with any type of transceiver for amateur use. The only time you'd want to change jumpers would be for some other type of connections other than your standard amplifier to transceiver interface. Now when you use the multi-plug, most of the time it's going to get power from the transceiver to power this 704. So at this time we do not use the power jack. Also the radio jack is another key line that some interfaces to some transceivers, but for this particular model we do not use the radio jack. If you refer to your cable instructions when you purchase the cable for your radio, it will go through step by step on what's needed for each radio to amplifier hookup. And then the next thing we need for the 704 will be the amp jack. This amp jack of the 704 goes and plugs into the relay connection on the back of the amplifier. Now if you're using ALC, if you want to hook up ALC, do not hook this up at this time. We will go through the procedure of tuning the amplifier and the antenna tuner up. During that time, after that has been done, then we will connect the ALC up and make those final adjustments. Okay, also if you hook a watt meter or antenna tuner inline, sometimes you may want to use the lamp, which requires 12 volts, and you would just follow your manual for the installation of power for the necessary accessories of your equipment. The next thing we want to hook up is, which is the very important thing, this is to help eliminate any RF feedback and getting RF burns and things. You would have a common ground bus of RF ground coming into your bench, and more than likely you would want it to run across the total length of your bench, one strap, common piece, and then you would hook a separate piece of strapping from each piece of equipment. You would go to the ground terminal of your transceiver over to your ground bus. You would then hook one from the ground of your amplifier over to your common ground bus, and then one to your antenna tuner to the ground terminal to the common ground bus. This way, if any RF comes in between each piece of equipment, it does not have to travel through the other equipment to find a ground. It can go straight to ground. Okay, now that you have all your equipment connected together, we are now ready to get ready to connect power to the amplifier. When you remove the packing out of the inside of the amplifier, there was a fuse pack in there, and you'll use those fuses to plug into the back of your amp. Now when looking at the amplifier, some amplifiers will have different current ratings for different voltages. For instance, this one here says it's a 12 amp fuses for 120 volt operation, or it's 8 amp for 240 volt operation. Now what this means is both fuses, they must be the same. So if you're running a 120 volt outlet that you're plugging the amplifier into, both fuses must be 12 amp fuses. So you would just simply, these fuses go in, they twist in and lock, and both of them would be the same. For this particular amp, we're using a 120 volt outlet, so I'm using two 12 amp fuses. And we recommend using fast blow ceramic type fuses to help give you better protection of the amplifier. So now you're ready to connect your power mains up, and we'll proceed on then on tuning the amplifier up.